Now, when it comes to Christianity, C.S. Lewis kind of revivified that argument, either God or a bad man, the Lord, liar, lunatic. We could add legend, right? I suppose we could also add possessed, kind of given our Christian worldview. Now, when I think of someone like Joseph Smith, right, who the founder of Mormonism, I can't agree with his claim to be a prophet. So I could perhaps say he's a liar. I could say he's a lunatic. I could say he's a legend. I could say he's possessed. I can't think of any other option. What would you say about Muhammad? Have you given that much thought?
I'd say that's actually how I break it down. When someone asks me, who was Muhammad? What was he? Was he possessed? Did these revelations have merely human origin? Was he insane? Was he a prophet? Those are normally the categories. You normally look at one, do these revelations have a purely human origin? Two, since we're Christians, we can talk about a darker source of the revelations. And then three, what evidence do you have that this is actually from God, that he's actually a prophet? And you see a lot of reasons in those first two categories to think that either his revelations have a human origin or a darker origin. So as far as, the human revelations, just, that appealing to people's carnal desires, that seems like a classic cult tactic. You have things like that. You have Muhammad constantly plagiarizing things that are now in the Quran that we can find in earlier sources. And I don't mean earlier reliable sources. I mean sources that we know were later fabrications. And Muhammad doesn't seem to be able to tell the difference between, a 5th or 6th century source that clearly made things up that no historian on the planet would take seriously, and actually quoting the Torah or the gospel, where according to Islam, those are revelations. Muhammad is talking about the Torah and the gospel, but doesn't seem to be aware of the difference between, a 5th century heretical or just fictitious forgery or something like that. Doesn't seem to be able to understand the difference between that and the actual Torah and gospel. And so as far as human origin, just he's getting these sources from places where we know the source. We know this comes from the Arabic infancy gospel. We know where this comes from. We know where that comes from. Looks like he's just taking these things and incorporating them into his religion. A lot of the just weird teachings he has, like, if a fly falls into your food, make sure you dunk the fly because one wing has a disease, but the other wing has the cure for the disease. He seems to be obsessive compulsive about how Muslims have to groom themselves. He put them on a schedule of how frequently they needed to, take care of their armpit hair, pluck their pubic hair and things like that. He just had them on this schedule. He would tell them how many stones they had to wipe themselves with after they go to the bathroom. He would tell them which foot to step into the bathroom first. He would tell them how they had to go to the bathroom. You have to squat to pee and things like that. So just it seems like obsessive compulsive. So it seems like a problem there. So you look at that kind of stuff and you say, this just looks like a guy who had some issues, and he's there in 7th century Arabia. And you take everything that's going on around him in 7th century Arabia. You had the pagans and their religious practices, which were things like taking a pilgrimage to the Kaaba, walking circles around the Kaaba, bowing down to the Kaaba. They had those practices. You've got some teachings of various heretical Christian groups, because I think it was Justinian, the Roman emperor, had expelled heretics, and a lot of them went to the Middle East. And so a lot of heretical people with weird books came to the Middle East. And then you have, of course, Jewish monotheism and the claims of not only the Torah, but also the what became the teachings of the Talmud and so on. You find all of the, it's like Muhammad took all of this and rolled it up into a big ball and said, this is the new religion. So all of that looks like a human origin. But when you get into this, you get into the spiritual stuff. As Christians, we would say, well, you had Jesus and he taught various things, and his disciples were with him for a few years. But the takeaway message, the gospel that they went out and preached, was a message about his death, his resurrection, and his deity. That's the takeaway in the book of Acts and in their letters. Guys, you got to get this down. He's the divine Son of God who died on the cross for sins and rose from the dead. So that's the takeaway message according to the apostles. But we're also told false teachers, false prophets are going to arise. What are they going to do? They're obviously going to lead you away from that. And then you get down to the time of Muhammad, and you look at what Muhammad teaches. It's basically, hey, you Christians, you believe in God? You believe in one God? So do I. You believe that Jesus is the Messiah? So do I. You believe Jesus performed all kinds of miracles, including raising the dead? So do I. You believe Jesus is going to return? So do I. I agree with you on almost everything. Virgin birth, miracles, we agree on all of this stuff, except these three little things. He's not the divine Son of God. He didn't die on the cross, and he didn't rise from the dead. Now, if we can just get past those three little things, we're totally on the same page. So the Christian perspective would be, my goodness, we've been waiting for you, because you're like the ultimate perfect example of a false prophet. Agree with you on all kinds of things, except the very heart of the gospel, and then try to lead people and keep people away from that heart of the gospel. So that doesn't seem just random, absorbing teachings. That actually seems like the classic biblical perspective on a false
the
prophet.
Antichrist.
Yeah. And then in addition to that, you've got some spiritual issues, you might say, that Muhammad, when he first starts receiving revelations in the cave, his first impression was that he was demon possessed. So he becomes demon possessed. He tries to hurl himself off a cliff. Whatever he encountered actually stops him from jumping off a cliff. And Muhammad goes home to his wife, and he's freaking out. He's saying, cover me, basically hide me from this thing that's chasing me. And it's his wife and her cousin who convince him that he's not possessed. They weren't in the cave. They have no idea what he encountered, but they convince him that he's not he's not possessed. He's a prophet of the Almighty. And so that doesn't, there's something to say about first impressions.
Yeah.
Sometimes your first impression is the correct one. You got people who didn't encounter whatever he encountered, and they're telling him that what he thought was demonic possession is actually an angel from God. So you have that. You have the infamous story of the satanic verses, where Muhammad was longing for some sort of revelation that would help his tribe convert to Islam, because they viewed him as a joke. And so he wanted some revelation that would convince them to convert to Islam. And finally, he got a revelation saying that Muslims could pray to three pagan goddesses, Alat, Alus, and Manat. And so it's basically, it calls them the exalted cranes. So they're these birds. And the idea is that Allah, he's way up there. And so you can pray to these three pagan goddesses, and they're like birds that will carry your prayers up to Allah. So Muhammad delivered this as part of the Quran, this new revelation from the Quran, that you could now pray to the pagan goddesses of his tribe, and you're good, because they're just going to carry your prayers to Allah. So Allah is still supreme. They're just these extra goddesses. And so he delivered this to his followers. His followers bowed down in honor of the new revelation, and the pagans bowed down in honor of the revelation too, because they were excited that Muhammad was now promoting their goddesses. Well, Muhammad comes back a little later, and he says that the devil tricked me into doing that. He says, I was receiving the revelation from the angel Gabriel when Satan stepped in, gave me those verses, and convinced me to recite those. Now, bare minimum there, Muhammad couldn't tell the difference between the revelation from God and the revelation from Satan. He couldn't tell the difference between being inspired by Gabriel and being inspired by Satan. And so that should be disturbing. But so that's the satanic verses. You have another time in Muhammad's life where a magician got a hair from his hairbrush and used it to cast a spell on him that lasted somewhere between 6 months and 2 years. But he's basically walking around in a state of delusion, claiming that he'd done things that he hadn't. Gave him delusional thoughts and false beliefs, and finally he snaps out of it and says that he'd been under a magic spell, which if you're God's last and greatest prophet, just kind of seems that people shouldn't be able to take you out like that just by getting a hair from your hairbrush. Then you have how the way that Muhammad is receiving his revelations. I mean, it sounds like something out of The Exorcist when he's being inspired. He'd be on the floor, his face would turn red, he'd start pouring down sweat and stuff like this as he's receiving these revelations. So put all that together, it looks like you definitely have a lot to be concerned about as far as, is there a spiritual dimension here where Muhammad is being used as a puppet by darker forces? So you consider the first option, the second option, and then the third option is, what are the arguments for Islam? And again, the core argument, Muhammad's main argument, is this argument from literary excellence. Now, I just wanted to read a quick, short chapter of the Quran to show people what we mean here when we talk about the Quran challenging people to bring a single chapter, like one chapter that we read in the Quran. Let me read this short chapter. So this is an entire chapter of the Quran. Some chapters are very long. You go towards the end, they're pretty short. So this is a short one at the end. In the name of Allah, most gracious, most merciful, say, O ye that reject faith, I worship not that which ye worship, nor will ye worship that which I worship, and I will not worship that which ye have been wont to worship, nor will ye worship that which I worship. To you be your way, and to me be mine. That's an entire chapter of the Quran. Now, a Muslim's going to say, but it only works in Arabic. Well, guess what? You can read that in Arabic too. That's what it sounds like, right? It doesn't sound that impressive. The idea that a human being is incapable of writing something like that. Again, this would be like, fans of Eminem or something coming out and saying Eminem's raps are the inspired raps of God. And then, Jay-Z's fans say, no, Jay-Z's raps are better. And then Eminem's fans say, okay, well, let's put Jay-Z up against Eminem and you'll see that Eminem's are better. Oh, by the way, us fans of Eminem, we're the judges of the contest. That's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. That's exactly what Muhammad did, right? So that's how it's set up in Islam, that if you don't agree, the Muslims are the judges and they'll just say you're biased. And so it's a very, very strange argument. Doesn't seem like it comes from the same God who came with parting the Red Sea and, raising the dead and things like that.
Thank you for watching this clip. You can click here to watch the full episode. And I want to say a big thanks to our sponsors and to our amazing patrons for making all of this possible. Please do us a favor before you go. Click that subscribe button and then the bell. And that way YouTube will be forced to let you know every time we put out a new episode.